Now, what we're going to do is we're just going to unmask some of these invisible scars from narcissistic abuse. And the scars are invisible. And in doing so, what we're going to do is just kind of unravel a bit of this enigma that is narcissistic abuse. Let me tell you, it's a crap show. It's all crap everywhere. It really is. It's like, sticking your head into a porta potty and it stinks down there. And the smell is so bad that you can almost taste it. And before we begin, I just want to get one thing straight and just clear something up. Not everyone who has narcissistic traits is a supervillain. And because narcissism is a spectrum, we can actually see where on the spectrum people are. And it's important to tell the difference where people are on that spectrum. It's like, telling the difference between a casual Star Wars fan and someone who's built a full-scale replica of the Millennium Falcon in their garage. And there are a lot of narcissists out there that, may show some of these little quirks, but don't necessarily engage in those villain-like, behaviors. But when we talk about abusive narcissistic partners, well, that's like dealing with, the Joker himself, someone who's just completely lost all touch with and grip with reality and is just kind of stuck in their own mental nut world. And they always seem to be like a step ahead, just ready to just mess with your mind and looking for all the little opportunities that they have to just mess with you and completely distort your reality and bring you into theirs. And that's an important distinction to make. And once you've decided where on the spectrum that your narcissistic partner is, well, that's where we can kind of gauge the level of chronic manipulation and devaluation that you're going through. And it's kind of like being stuck in a never-ending episode of The Twilight Zone, where victims of narcissistic abuse often find themselves feeling like they're in this surrealish, nightmarish situations. And it's horrible there. It's really horrible because it feels like we're just drowning in our own anxieties at times. It's like, walking into a Stephen King novel and just contemplating unthinkable things you never normally would have done or said or been. And it's all the result of this, relentless emotional turmoil that we endure. It's the constantly being triggered, the constantly being on guard, the adrenaline, the cortisol, all those things in our emotions just we can't seem to get them under control. And that's intentional. That's part of the way the narcissist just kind of manipulates and pulls strings, because they literally drive us crazy in order to call us crazy, and it's nuts, but it's their nuts. And what we're going to find is these narcissistic manipulation tactics, they tend to follow a cycle. And the cycle is idealization, devaluation, and then discard. So you can imagine yourself, it's just like, you're like riding on this Mario Kart through this weird, twisted little world, and things are getting thrown at you. And the plot that you're going through is more twisted than, the Game of Thrones plot line. And, narcissistic abusers, they tend to alternate between showering their partner with just enormous amounts of love, and then just like that, in a snap, they just go full Cersei Lannister on you, and they eventually, you're just discarded as if you were like an old iPhone that's no longer useful. Now, narcissistic abuse, it's pretty serious. So what actually is it, and why is it significant? Well, narcissistic abuse refers to, the narcissistic personality disorder, also known as NPD. And for those on the extreme end of the narcissistic spectrum, it's an entire, manipulative dark web that you just kind of get yourself stuck into. And what ends up happening is it leaves victims just grappling for control in these conditions. And we can get conditions like, PTSD from them, or complex PTSD, which, by the way, is traditionally used for just battle-hardened war veterans, but it can also apply to just survivors of narcissistic psychological warfare, because that's exactly what we've been going through over long periods of time. And it changes our brain chemistry, living in survival mode all the time. Trying to get through the day, trying to get through the week, trying to get through the month, even trying to get through the very minute that we're in right now. And that can be difficult for somebody who's just been traumatized and their brain chemistry has completely changed because of the tactics that were used on them. And narcissists are really hard to pin down. It's almost like trying to nail down Jello to a wall. And the reason is because they're like master illusionists. In fact, they're like, magicians almost. And worse than magicians, they're almost holograms of magicians, almost like a hologram of Houdini himself. And narcissists employ all sorts of covert and subtle methods of abuse, often in, escaping accountability, because narcissists present as almost like a Tony Stark level facade to the outside world. And trying to expose someone like Lex Luthor when they're, posing as their, masterful philanthropist is almost impossible, because they've created this other identity that so many people just kind of just thrive on, and just can't seem to get that there's another side to that person. And yeah, the narcissistic persona, it's charming. But what it does is the purpose of that charming persona is to conceal, the cruelty and the manipulation of their real core nature. And they're very selective on the targets that they choose. And if you're one of the people that have been targeted, there's a reason for that. And a lot of it is because they actually see you as somebody who's emotionally stronger or more stable and just emotionally aware. And these are all tactics that they don't have. And in order to justify their existence, crushing you becomes their ability to prove that those things aren't necessary in life. And yet they are, because they become vital in even our healing process. And the scars from narcissistic abuse are not always visible. And there is a big difference between the physical abuse and the emotional abuse. Because, physical abusers can leave scars and bruises that we can point to. But narcissistic abusers are far more cunning, because what they end up doing is just planting seeds within their victims' minds that end up growing and festering and become quite toxic. That even when the narcissist leaves, those seeds have been planted and they tend to go on repeat and on a loop. And this psychological abuse, what ends up happening is it ends up building over time. Because if you actually look back, you can realize that this behavior, if it was done earlier in the relationship, there wouldn't have been a relationship, which means that there's a grooming process. There's a process of psychological torture that the narcissist kind of put us through in order for us to be okay with little by little, just extremely toxic behavior that we never would have allowed earlier on in the relationship when we had more self-esteem. But after time, they wear down our self-esteem, and after the self-esteem wears down, then it enables them to do worse and worse things to us. And this isn't all doom and gloom, because what I want to do is just by pointing a spotlight into the darkness that is narcissistic abuse, it can be almost like a bat signal that's just piercing the sky of Gotham City at night. It's that, yes, things are bad, but there is hope. There is something that we can do. And one of the things we can do is just, acknowledge these invisible scars and, respect this indomitable spirit of survivors who rise up above it. Because it takes a lot of courage to rise up and, bring out these abusive patterns and this toxic behavior out into the open. And that's how we break the cycle. And together we can break the cycle just by bringing some of this hidden abuse more into the open and offer support for those who need. And just like, Lord of the Rings, there's a fellowship. There's a fellowship of group of people that know exactly what you're going through. And this fellowship and this community that we can create within our own little networks is important in order to just defeat, the Dark Lord. And here's the thing, when we're like trapped in these toxic environments, especially over long periods of time, it becomes this process of just navigating just a maze of this narcissistic manipulation. And that's being able to spot the smoke in the mirror. And spotting it is the first step in order towards breaking the patterns, because here's the thing with narcissistic abusive relationships, they manipulate their victims into, making the victims just not even trust their own reality. It's like they've got this ultimate gaslighting playbook where they make victims just doubt their own sanity. And they'll plant doubts and insecurities that never existed before, that aren't actually there, and use whatever vulnerabilities that they can get their hands on in order just to tighten their grip, tighten their ability to control you. And once you see it, you can realize that you can loosen their grip. And the gaslighting no longer has any effect on you. You're almost observing it from a distance. Because the point of the gaslighting is to make victims just believe that somehow that they were provoked, or even that, that they deserve the abuse that they got. It's like living in this distorted version of some kind of twisted reality show where it's just like things are being thrown at you and you have to realize that half of this stuff or most of this stuff isn't even real. And being able to ground ourselves and being able to hold true to ourselves, to our own core beliefs, and remember who we are. That's the path to just disabling all of that gaslighting nonsense. And gaslighting is just one of the tactics. It's just one of the ways that they use to just kind of manipulate us, because if we actually open up, it's like Pandora's box of just toxic behavior. And it's like a menu of just emotional destruction. And trust me, this list is exhaustive. It just seems to go on and on. But being able to see it, being able to label it, all of a sudden we become the observer of it. And the second that happens, we're able to separate from it. And a little bit of that control, we just start to get back. And the levels, the extremes that these narcissists go, well, it's just like they become so, critical and so controlling in their behavior that it makes, the Matrix almost sound like a children's storybook. Because the tactics that narcissists use, the abusers use, and their whole goal is to manipulate, to isolate, to demean their victims like they're, trapped in their own matrix themselves. And the second that they're challenged, it's just all of a sudden they'll shower contempt upon their victims, just hurling insights and derogatory remarks about their, whether it's your appearance, whether it's your intelligence, whether it's your accomplishments, or even the support system that you have that's helping ground you and keep you sane. They'll question all of those things, because all of those things are where your power is. And they're all things that threaten their control over you. And it's like, where's the limit? Where's the end of this abuse? You think if you could hit the limit that it'll stop? No, unfortunately, it just keeps going deeper and deeper into this narcissistic abyss. And it can escalate to, physical abuse, to sexual abuse. And this is just where this romantic drama just turns into this full-blown action thriller. And so many victims of narcissistic abuse, endure just pushing and hitting and slapping and choking and non-consensual encounters, and find themselves in these twisted situations that would make even James Bond be like, whoa, this is like no supervillain that I've ever seen. And it's just like James Bond, it's important to keep our cool. It's important to keep, secret little tactics, secret little weapons that we can use to just continually ground ourselves and remind ourselves that, we are real, and our thoughts are real, and our emotions are real. And even though they're not acknowledged by the narcissist, it doesn't invalidate who we are as people. So we're going to keep pushing forward, and together we're going to make a difference, because the more people that kind of get this information out, the better. So please, like, comment, tell me exactly what you think, or share. There's a lot more videos out there. I have a lot of videos on my feed, hundreds of them even. And, thank you for your support.